My name is Justin Cohee, and I have been asked on multiple occasions to start doing some introductory violin web seminars, if you will, or instructional videos. So, to kick it off, for today's lesson, I'm going to go over the basic parts of the violin and kind of getting it set up. Because there's a few things that can really help you when you get a violin, especially a cheap violin, which most of us are going to start off unless we got lots of money. In which case you're not going to be watching this video anyway, you can go see your instructor. But anyway, there's a few setup things that you can do to make it just a little bit easier to play when you go, say, purchase it from a music store or a pawn shop or whatever. First thing you need to know is this is your violin. The different parts of the violin. You have your F holes. This here is a really important part. This is called the bridge. This is actually what transfers the vibrations from your strings through the sound peg, which is inside here, down to the bass, and then it kind of reverberates through the F holes and makes the whole thing go. So this being set up right is going to have a lot to do with your tone, how good a tone you get. And then of course you have your strings. This is the neck. These four screw looking things here, these are your fiddle pegs, is what you're going to use to tighten the fiddle strings with. And down here on the ends here we have the fine tuners. They let you fine tune a little bit more than what you can get out of the pegs because they kind of move in larger increments. In the older days, when they were made with actual gut string instead of steel, they didn't use fine tuners except on the one E string that was actually steel, because they were a lot more elastic. But when you get into steel strings, whether it's a steel core or a stainless steel wrap or whatever kind of string you're getting, the fine tuners really help a lot. The four notes that you want on your strings, smallest one is a E, next one's a D, and a G. Until you learn to tune it yourself, but tune it off of your ear, it's a good idea to get a hold of a tuner from the music store, or even you can actually download an app on your phone or whatever, just so you'll be able to tune them to that and set it to A at 440 Hertz. Because you always want to play in tune, that way you can train your ear to listen for the notes, because unlike like on a guitar or a mandolin, it has no frets on the fingerboard. So it's all in where you learn to position your fingers. And if you learn to play out of tune, then those notes are not going to be in the same place as they are if you're in tune. So it's very important that you want to start off playing the violin in tune. When you initially set one up, it helps a lot with your fingering. Is the least amount of pressure you have to apply with your left hand, the better off you're going to be. So a lot of times the nut, which is this part here on the end of your fingerboard, is too high from the factory. It's actually supposed to be cut down, but a lot of times the ones you get from the music stores, or like I say, pawn shops or whatever, they're usually not. So they have a bridge that's too thick and too high, and they have the nut here on the end, which is often also too high. As far as the bridge, a simple way to cut your bridge down to size is to take a pencil and lay it on the fingerboard, before you put your strings on. Hold your bridge in place, which should go directly between these two little nicks on your F hole. That's how they're designed. It's supposed to go directly in between these two little nicks on your F hole. And that'll place it in the right spot. So you take a pencil and you lay it on your fingerboard, and then you roll it across. You have the tip of the pencil against your bridge, and you roll it across, and you'll make a line, an arching line that matches the arch of your fingerboard. And you'll find that's probably a little lower than what the bridge is when it's a bridge blank, which is what you usually get. So if you cut it down to that line, then you're going to generally get a better sound. And then just try, and if you can zoom in here, you'll notice how it slants slightly towards the back. You want to thin that down to where the top here is about the same width as the wood on the top of your fiddle. You can get into a lot more fine-tune adjustments if you wanted to talk to a luthier about it, but for most of us who are just getting started, this is going to give us a lot better tone and a lot better sound than what we'd get just using a blank bridge. Back here, we're going to do the same thing, but what we're going to do is we're going to take a playing card, and after you've strung it up a little bit, take a playing card and put it underneath each individual string and see if use that like a feeler gauge. You want the string to set on top of the card, not higher above it, not below it. And so cut your notches down a little bit and make sure they're at a good sloping angle when you cut them in, to where it just sits on top of a playing card, and that is going to make it a lot easier for your finger, your left hand, because you're not going to be having to push so hard at such a and such a far distance before you make contact with the board, which is going to give you better intonation, just easier playing, especially like for smaller children who just get started. They don't have all the finger strength in it. It doesn't take a lot of finger strength to play a violin, but it makes a significant difference on making it a little easier to play. And then when you string it up, make sure you take the same pencil and draw in these notches to get some graphite in there, and what that does is it lubricates the strings. You do the same thing in the notches on the boards here, or on the on the bridge here, because that lubricates the notches, so your string, when you're tightening it up and loosening it, doesn't saw through the wood. It's pretty hard wood here, but this isn't actually all that hard of wood. So after time, it'll actually cut down into the wood and change the dimensions there, and then you'll get some ringing and so forth. Another problem that you oftentimes run into on cheaper entry-level violins is these will be often either really tight or too loose. And most of the time that's because they're not cut exactly round and match the pegs like they should be. So I found what helps a lot is, like, if they're a little too loose, if they don't tighten quite good enough, you can add a little more friction by taking a piece of chalk, just like common drawing chalk, and kind of draw on the peg, and that puts a little bit of abrasive in there, and that'll help them hold a bit better, so they're not slipping loose all the time. And the same thing if they're too tight and they're moving in squeaky jerks, you can take a little bit of soap, very little bit, like a bar soap, and wipe just a little bit on there, and that'll help lubricate and loosen them up. So, you know, a little chalk to make them tighter and a little soap to make them looser. Just don't overdo it. Now, a lot of old-time fiddle players don't use a shoulder rest, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can play with or without a shoulder rest, but I found it's a lot easier on your neck, especially when you're first trying to learn to hold the violin, to get a shoulder rest. And you can usually get a shoulder rest from the music store for about $15 or $20 or something on the low end, and way high on the high end. But when you're first starting out, you don't need much, but it helps a lot. If you don't want to get a shoulder rest, just take a wash rag or something and put it there, just to give it a little beefiness here, to make it a little easier, so you're not cramming so hard on your chin. I mean, like I say, you can use it without your chin, or without your chin rest, but you're going to put more strain on your neck and on your shoulder, trying to kind of cinch them up together, and the less strain you have in your neck, the easier it's going to be to play, and the less sore necks you're going to get. So I recommend getting some kind of a shoulder rest, especially when you're just getting started. Now, some old-time players will play like down in here, you know, stuff like that. You might see them. Try to avoid that kind of playing. It's best to adhere when you're first learning to if you study a little bit of the classical violin holds, especially on the bow and how to hold the violin up. even if you're not going to play classical violin, you're going to free up your left arm a lot more. I'll show you how that works too. Than you would. So if you decide you want to play, vibrato or crescendos and fancy stuff like that, you have the foundation to do it. If you're playing like old-timey fiddle where you're grabbing it like a shovel and holding it down here, you're going to have a lot harder time doing that stuff later on if you so decide to. So what you want to do is you want to practice, take a couple of minutes every session and just practice learning to hold it without using your hands in place. And then when you do start putting your hand on, what you want to have a contact point above the thumb knuckle and just about in here on your index finger like this. Okay, now your index finger is going to move around a little bit more, but your thumb, you don't want it collapsed inside there like that. You want a window right here maintained. And then imagine there's like an egg in your hand and you're trying to keep the egg away from that so it doesn't crack. The last thing you want to do is this right here. You don't want to collapse your wrist flat on it like this, like you're holding it up, because you can't hardly move it when you want to do advanced stuff. But also, this position here over time can give you carpal tunnel syndrome, very much like typing with your hand in this position. So you want to keep your hand in a neutral position, and that'll allow you later on to learn to do your vibratos and stuff. You want to contact the strings with the very tips of your fingers as much as possible. And on your finger spacings, like I was saying before, there's no frets on here. So what you do is usually your natural finger spacing will look kind of like this, okay? And when you first start playing probably a couple songs in A, like Twinkle Little Star and Mary Had a Little Lamb and so on and so forth, this is mostly what you'll be doing, is getting this foundation here. Later on, when you start playing various types of flats and sharps, then you'll learn to stretch this finger down here and this one down here and this one out here and so on and so forth. But your main foundation is right here. You want to practice getting these intonation. And if you have your electric tuner, it's a really good idea to also take a little bit of time each session just trying to watch your tuner and listen to it and try and get it perfectly in pitch when you're just one note at a time, kind of like just some long strokes where you're do that on whichever notes you've learned, and that'll help to train your ear. This here is the bow, and they're usually either made of wood or fiberglass, or carbon fiber, or all sorts of material they've made them out of. Again, these can be around $15–20 or up to $300, $500, $1,000. Depending on how much you want to spend on them. I don't spend in that range myself. The hair here is generally either horse hair or a type of synthetic hair that's basically a copy of horse hair. Whenever you're not playing your violin, you want to store it loose so that you don't take the spring out of the wood. If you store it all tightened up, then the wood will also follow and give to it, and pretty soon you'll be tightening it more and more and more, and you won't have the right tension on it. When you're playing it, I usually like to tighten it up kind of just where the strings all tighten up and they're not on the butt. You can play with it a little bit. If you loosen it a little bit, you get a little huskier sound. If you tighten it a bit, you get a more sharp, loud sound. So it just depends on what you're shooting for. But I usually tighten it kind of about like that. Just a little gap, but not too much. Another important thing is don't touch the hairs, because this has to have rosin on it. I didn't bring my rosin over here to show you, but it's kind of like a tree sap is what it is, and you gotta wipe that up and down on the strings in order to build some friction. If you look real close here at the strings, this white powder, that's the rosin, because without it, you know, it won't have any sound. But you don't want the oils of your finger to get on the hairs, otherwise you'll reduce the friction and then you'll have smooth spots on it and it won't sound right. What helps a lot, if you got a brand new bow, sometimes it's hard to get the rosin onto the bow, so if you take just like a little bit of sandpaper and just make a little work on the surface of your rosin, make a little dust, and then it can help you get it started, getting some rosin on the bow. You don't need a whole heck of a lot, but if you see there that powder, that's more than plenty of powder there. I mean, that's actually probably a little too much. So when you got lots of powder coming off, you probably don't need to add any more rosin for a little while. It's a good idea after you're done playing to wipe the strings off, just to get the old rosin off, because they will build up dust and stuff because it's kind of sticky. Every now and then, if you take a little bit of rubbing alcohol and a small rag, you can just clean those off. It's good for it. Just don't get any on the finish because it'll eat through the finish, and that helps it helps it sound a bit better and everything. You want to one of the first things you want to learn how to do is make nice, long, straight strokes with your bow. Everybody wants to get in and go, but you don't worry about that right away. What you want is you want to be able to control it from the frog. This is the frog, and this is the tip. You want long, straight. Right in the middle. You want to try and keep it right centered with it. Again, later on, you can play with that a little bit. If you move it a little this way, you get a louder sound. You move it over that way, you get a little bit softer, huskier sound. And so, depending on the style that you adopt, you can play around with that too. Also, if you start playing double stops later on, you'll find they're a little easier down here than they are up here, just because of the way the tension of the strings change when you get down there. Let me show you how to hold the bow. There's a lot of different ways a person can hold the bow, but it's best to learn to take a classical hold. This is a classical hold right here, and basically you place your thumb on this side and your middle and ring fingers kind of push that into there, and stretch out your index finger over here and have a contact point right along that seam of your finger right there. And this one here, it's important to keep a curve to it. Don't lock it like this, and keep this knuckle unlocked too, so there's a little space there. Don't lock it like that, because that'll all put tension on it and stiffen up your wrist. That's a lot of it, is you don't want to stiffen up your wrist because your wrist has to flex. Most of the playing is actually from your wrist and your elbow, not so much from your shoulder. If you go from your shoulder, you'll end up, you see how your bow rocks back and forth, but if you concentrate on your wrist and your elbow, then you have enough flexion to keep it going more straight. And an exercise that actually helps a lot with that, I'm going to step over here. You can do this in a doorway. I have a tree at the moment, but if you like get next to a wall or a tree or doorway or something, you actually lock your elbow up against the tree, and then just practice playing, doing your long strokes from just these 2 points, eliminating the shoulder as far as you can. That will help you to learn to flex these two rather than rotating your shoulder. The other hold, that's the simplest for a beginner, is also good, is just to take and hold it like that with the meaty section of it there. And that works just as well. And the reason you want to learn to hold it one of those two ways is because if you could hold it with just 2 fingers, and it would be fine for some types of playing. But if you started to want to do off bow techniques where you're like, you got to be able to lift the whole weight of the bow. Anyway, so that's the first lesson, and we'll work on a song next video.